environment and forestry. Since the MOU between Ministry of Environment and Forestry and UNDP ended in 2019, the Multi-Door 2.0 has been in a vacuum, as coordination meetings, capacity building, or joint law enforcement activities are no longer being carried out. And then, multi-door approach should be continuously institutionalized to strengthen natural resource governance. Furthermore, a multi-legal regime is essential because verdicts in natural resource cases remain relatively low. The multi-door approach implemented so far does not have a clear mechanism, weak institutions, no guidelines have been created, and sectoral egos. And during the Prabowo Subianto administration, we can see organizational structuring took place, including the separation of ministries and agencies and the making of new agencies. We can see in Joko Widodo administration, there were only 34 ministries, and in this administration, it is added, become 49 ministries. So I want to seek what is the model of institution and agencies that need to be involved in multi-door institution 3.0, and what policy acceleration need to be implemented in multi-door institution 3.0. Okay, the history and conception of integrated law enforcement approach or multi-door. The multi-door approach can be seen from the theory of concurrent criminal acts or concursus. The Dutch term for combined criminal acts is called samenloop van strafbaar feiten, while concursus comes from Latin language. Some initiative of collaborative effort in international level, we can see a US operation Cool Breeze, established in 1990 to combat CFC smuggling, and also Interpol member countries are encouraged to establish National Environmental Security Task Force, designed to combat transnational environmental crime through coordinated, collaborative, and responsive methods. The example of NEST institutions are in New Zealand and also in Scotland. And in Southeast Asia level, there are 4 countries that have a collaborative model. The first is Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and also Laos. And in Indonesia, we have also a collaborative model for enforcement in natural resources. The first in 2005. We have a sustainable forest operation conducted in Sumatra, Kalimantan, and Papua. And also task force of 115 for illegal fishing, led by the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries. And also task force for forest area orderliness, established last year, 2025, until present, led by the Ministry of Defense and also Attorney General. Ladies and gentlemen, I will inform you about criminal investigators in Indonesia. The first is police investigator, is the primary investigator in Indonesia, authorized to conduct investigation in all sectors. And the second is civil servant investigator like me, is under the coordination and supervision of police investigator. Civil servant investigator are positioned in sectoral ministries or agencies, for example, in the Ministry of Forestry, Ministry of Environment, and also local government. The third is attorney investigator, authorized to conduct investigation on serious human rights violations, corruption crimes, and also money laundering. The fourth is military investigator, authorized to conduct investigation on criminal acts committed by active military members. And the fifth is another investigator, such as narcotics investigator, financial service investigator, and also anti-corruption investigator. This is the main slide of my presentation. This is the model I propose for Multi-Door 3.0 institution. The Multi-Door 3.0 framework resembles the layers of the earth or an onion, consisting of 4 layers: core 1, core 2, core 3, and core 4, alongside an outer core comprising state agencies that provide political support and external oversight. This Multi-Door 3.0 concept differs from 1.0 and 2.0 version by featuring a more comprehensive array of participating agencies. It injects all branches of the trias politica, the executive, the legislative, and judicial, as well as social organizations. The framework is underpinned by robust checks and balances. The core of multi-door framework consists of law enforcement agencies in natural resources sector, such as the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Forestry, Ministry of Marine Affairs, and also we have Army because so many environmental breaches conducted by active military members. And in Core 2, there are such as Anti-Corruption Commission, who conduct investigation on ancillary offenses such as corruption, health crime, trade crime, and financial service crime. And in the Core 3, there are agencies that support case detection and also provide data for improvement. And in Core 4, there are agencies that facilitate policy synchronization, internal oversight, and resource mobilization, such as the Ministry of Finance, who support us with adequate funding, the Ministry of State Apparatus, who empower civil servants like me. This is the role, the detail of the role of the institution. There are 45 total institutions in Multidor 3.0. And the summary of the model, the first, the institution not only consists of core law enforcement agencies in natural resource sector, but is also equipped with support system, namely agencies that enforcing the ancillary offense, agencies that play a role in providing case detection and data for evidence, and agencies for providing support for policy synchronization, internal supervision, and resource mobilization. And outside the Multidor 3.0 institution, there are other support systems, namely support from institutions outside the executive for political support and external supervision, namely the Indonesian House of Representatives, the Audit Board, the Supreme Court, the Ombudsman, the mass media, academician or expert, and also CSOs. And the third, in contrast to Multidor 1.0 and 2.0, which only had members from government agencies at the central level, Multidor 3.0 needs to expand its institutional capacity by including local governments, both at provincial and district level, because sectoral laws in natural resource sector also give the mandate to local governments to conduct monitoring and law enforcement. And I have 4 policy acceleration for Multidor 3.0. The first, Multidor must be prioritized to dismantle organized criminal networks. This approach should not be interpreted merely as imposing multiple layers of punishment on a single perpetrator. Rather, Multidor approach requires a broader interpretation aimed at exposing and eradicating organized criminal groups. Sanctions may be applied to both individual and corporate legal subjects. The range of perpetrators extends from field operators, those issuing orders, and leaders of the activity, to the ultimate beneficial owners, utilizing various legal regimes. The second, Multidor should not only rely on criminal sanction, but also utilize another legal instrument such as administrative and civil sanction. Multidor law enforcement is not interpreted as criminal law approach, but also encompass other legal instruments. Why is combination of administrative, civil, and criminal legal instrument is very necessary? Because a restorative justice approach is now become famous, focus on the restoration of harm suffered by the victims of the criminal acts. The environment can also be the victim of criminal acts. So imposing only criminal sanction often takes a long time due to the complexities of proving in the court. But by using alternative measures such as administrative sanction and civil enforcement, it will be real quick for the enforcement. The third, Multidor is not only the application of multiple legal regime, but also a form of multi-agency involvement in law enforcement. I give you a case. This is case in 2020, conducted by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry it is hailed as good multi-door cases, but these cases only handled by one single ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, despite it's using some more than one legal regimes. And I will recommend you the real multi-door cases that successful in my country. This is the case of ship smuggling chemical liquid from Singapore to Batam area. And it conducted investigation by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry and also the Ministry of Transportation. And then the judge sentenced the ship's captains using environmental law and also the shipping law. The fourth, determining the leading sector of multi-door 3.0. For the technical aspect of law enforcement, the most appropriate agency to lead the multi-door institution is the National Police or the Attorney General. But considering that the multi-door 3.0 concept also includes another ministries, agencies that do not carry out investigating function, the ideal leader is the coordinating minister for political and security affairs because of some reasons. The first is from a constitutional perspective, the coordinating ministry for political and security affairs has the ideal political capacity and legal legitimacy to lead multi-door institution. And according to presidential regulation, the coordinating ministry is responsible for synchronizing and coordinating the implementation of ministerial affairs within its respective governmental areas. And for closing, multi-door 3.0 institution need to be legalized through regulation, at least at the level of presidential regulation, so that they can bind various ministries, agencies, and local government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Daru, for reminding us that collaboration is king. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our final speaker for this session. That's Dr. Loganathan Krishnan, Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Our good doctor will be talking on ESG, indigenous rights, and the rule of law, pathways to environmental justice. Dr. Krishnan is an accomplished academic and legal scholar specializing in corporate and constitutional law. He obtained his law degree from the University of London, followed by a Master's of Law and a PhD in Law from the University of Malaya, focusing on corporate law. He also holds a postgraduate certificate in higher education from Curtin University of Technology, reflecting his commitment to pedagogy and academic excellence. He also has a diploma in corporate governance from Basel Institute, Switzerland. He lectures corporate law to both undergraduate and postgraduate students and serves as chief examiner and external moderator for professional examinations conducted by the Chartered Tax Institute of Malaysia. His teaching contributions extend internationally. Having been a guest lecturer at the Sussex University, University of Tunku Abdul Rahman, and Taylor's University. In recognition of his dedication, he received a Pro-Vice Chancellor's Letter of Commendation for Excellence in Education in 2017, whilst teaching at the Monash University in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome our last speaker, Dr. Krishnan.
A very good afternoon to the ladies and gentlemen here. The title of my presentation is on ESG, Environment, Society, Governance. I'm looking at indigenous rights, and I'm connecting it with rule of law. I find that this is a way, the pathway to environmental justice. I'm also the director of Center of Legal Pluralism and Indigenous Law at my university. The question which I have for all of us is whether ESG principles can ensure sustainability and do justice, do equity to the indigenous people of Malaysia. Now, I've used the word indigenous in a generic sense, but my study is confined to only the Aboriginal people. And rule of law is a very important concept as to see how the law is ruled, as to how the law treats Aboriginal people, as to whether there is fairness and justice. This remote is not doing justice to me. So we have a specific legislation in Malaysia, specifically for the Aboriginal people, and this was enacted in 1954 before the independence in 1957. And this legislation was enacted by the British. And the lifestyle of the Aboriginal people is shifting cultivation, they collect resources, and they have a very close relationship with land. And but there is something ironic about this in Malaysia. Since I mentioned that Aboriginal people have a very close relationship with land, but land is a state matter, whereas the Aboriginal Peoples Act 1954 is a federal legislation. So what can happen is the state may do a certain act to the Aboriginal people, but it is not governed by the act because the act is a federal matter. And the federal government cannot interfere with how the state government is going to deal with the land. And this can be seen in the provisions of the Aboriginal Peoples Act, where land which is gazetted can be degazetted. And there is a specific provision which says that the Aboriginal people do not have ownership, although the Aboriginal people may have habitually, customarily, traditionally, for generations may have occupied that land. And they can also be evicted without any prior notice. And if at all justice is to be done, it is only for compensation for loss of fruit and rubber trees. But you and I know in the forest, there is no rubber trees and there's no fruit trees. So this compensation is not realistic. And even if the state government chooses to pay compensation, it is discretionary because the provision uses the word may and not shall. Further looking at some of the provisions, the power is not given to the Aboriginal people to determine how they should live their life. It is vested in the minister, which belongs to the federal government, and the commissioner shall be responsible for the administration. So it is a very top-down approach, and there is no equal bargaining position between the community and the government. Consequently, this would mean there's no room for consultation, for dialogue session, for partnership, so on and so forth. So what justice has the law done? There's no justice. There's no rule of law from the Aboriginal Peoples Act 1954's perspective. Now is 2026. This law, this legislation is still present. And it has not been amended, it has not been repealed. Now, the earlier speaker, Dr. Bal, was quoting the judgment about the court being the bulwark of justice, the last bastion of liberty. We have several cases started in 1991, moving on to 1997, 2002, and the Commonwealth, and there was a case last month. I have not put it in the slides. All these cases do recognize to some extent the native title, customary title, although in paper there's nothing to say that the Aboriginal people have title. So the courts are to some extent doing justice to the Aboriginal people, thanks to Mr. Stephen Tiru, who was one of the counsel for the latest case in July 2026. 7 Aboriginal people brought up the matter to the court because their ancestral land, which includes burial site, graveyards, cemetery, was taken over by a company called Agrobest Private Limited Company. Matter went right up to the federal court, the highest court in Malaysia, and the court made a decision in favor of the Aboriginal community. So the courts are doing its level best to bring about justice, but not in the Aboriginal Peoples Act. We would want not only rule of law to be delivered by the courts, but also by the Parliament as well. Now, but although the courts have done justice, it is piecemeal approach. We are not sure what will happen tomorrow, although the trend seems to be of late that the Aboriginal people communities' rights are taken care of. Now, so a lot of issues are taking place. Logging licenses, flood have destroyed their homes, and as a result, there is an environmental damage. Land has been turned into fruit orchards, and there is trespass to the Aboriginal people's land. So I'm now bringing in a different angle, which is ESG. And we all know what ESG is about. It's about environment, it's about society, it's about governance. And society here should not only be the mainstream community. It should also be the minorities. It should also be the Aboriginal people. Decisions should not be made only by the majority, not in favor of the minority. And governance is not just about making decisions in favor of the majority, but also in favor of the minority. So we have a specific provision in the Companies Act 2016, which talks about ESG, not explicitly, but implicitly, talking about how corporations should consider about environmental matters, how corporations should consider about social matters, society, community issues. And as a result, there is an obligation on the part of the corporation to consider the Aboriginal people's interests. Many a times you will notice that environmental damage is being done by corporations. Timber licenses are being issued to corporations. So if we look at ESG principles and we impose ESG obligation on corporations, then the damage is minimized. Is minimized if it's not possible to be extinguished. And there has always been calls again and again by the Aboriginal people to amend the Aboriginal Peoples Act, or at least repeal, but nothing has taken place. Memorandum has been submitted to the government many a times, but it has fallen on deaf ears. The courts are delivering justice to the best they can. The corporations are still playing the game where they will wait and see. They will exploit the land to the best they can until a suit is brought against them. And good-hearted lawyers who are doing cases pro bono will take up the matter to the court. But regulators have to come into picture, because obligations are placed on corporations to comply with ESG commitments in terms of environment, in terms of society generally, and the way board of directors should make decisions in favor of all stakeholders and not just shareholders. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause to our last prominent speaker. Dr. Krishnan has just reminded us on the parliamentary responsibility to ensure that legislation are not archaic or draconian. That's my take on it. And you've been a lovely audience, and now we have come to the part for a little Q&A, if we have time, Master of Ceremony. So the floor is open now for questions and answers. So if you would like to make a statement, please go ahead. And when you are given a microphone, you mention your name and where you are from. Thank you. Yes, there's one at the back, MC.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Professor Chalapan Kalawin. I come from the University of Natural Resources and Environment in East New Britain. Formerly, I was working with the University of Papua New Guinea, but I'm a Papua New Guinean scientist right across the world. So if you've been around the world, you're talking to these Papua New Guineans who are scientists. Every time I see you lawyers talking about your law, right? This is where I'm coming from. You go all around the world, you go to Pacific Islands, you go across there, and so on, and I'm talking to, having seen our friend from Malaysia, who is asking two questions about land ownership and so on, let me give it to you, like I said. If you're a scientist, you ask yourself, how many planets are there in the universe? You know that? Or you're typical lawyers who only talks about putting people in jail? How many planets are there in the universe? You don't know? So which is the hottest planet in the world, in the universe? Jupiter? Definitely all of you lawyers I will fail all of you since you don't know this. But coming back to this issue, like I said, I've seen a lot of you talking with different law groups around the region, around the world, from Europe all the way down to the Pacific. And when I look at this, your comments, all of them, you were talking about your history coming back all the way. In Papua New Guinea, when I take this across to the science, this is where we're coming from. We can deviate a fair bit on our understanding of what the law is, but you forget to use the science involved with this. That's what I get all of you to do this. In relation to what my friend from Malaysia University was talking about, including ANU talking about, it starts with what I call the bottom-up approach. The governance of the law actually starts from the people in this region. In Aborigines, like in Australia and so on, people like us, we've been in there. We talk to our people in Australia, New Zealand, and talk to them about, we advise them about land, we advise them about the ocean, who owns that land and who owns that resources in the ocean. We've come back and we've developed our own laws in this country, like the ocean laws. From the science, that's what we do, we affect them. From the forestry, I see there's quite a fair bit of missing link in some of you talking about
Prof,
for this.
if
So
I may, as
that's
the
why I'm
moderator,
coming.
I have the authority to control time. So if you have a question to ask, may you kindly ask to the panel and direct it. Or
Yeah,
if you would
sure.
like to make a statement, can you kindly sum it up?
Yep.
Thank you.
No problems. I thought I'll give you the little background before this, and that's where I'm coming from. So my little question to you about this is in terms of governance. When you're doing your law, who is the most important thing, given Papua New Guinea has got 800 different languages? Do you start from the bottom, or do you start from the government and you come down? That's basically what I'm coming from, because of where the unique system of this country is. 800 different languages, 10% of the forestry, biodiversity belongs to Papua New Guinea, and that's my question is, where do you start in terms of your governance in law? Since all of you are coming from different regions in this. Do you pick up the science with it, or do you just lawyers talking to yourselves? Thank you so much. I'll leave it like this.
Well, thank you. Floor is still open. On the same side, I see a hand there, MC. And you advise on the timing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Marstafatu, and I'm from Niue. I'm a land commissioner, just very new kid on the block. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentations. I wanted to ask a question before, and my one is in relation to should environmental laws incorporate indigenous and spiritual values when addressing environmental challenges? And the second one is that, are there any strong monitoring and evaluation of all the laws that you have? This is in relation to how can you measure GDP in relation also to what the damages have been done by all these environmental issues that you're talking about, pollution and all these other things. Thank you.
Hello. I mean, from the PNG's perspective, should environmental laws consider culture and tradition and so forth? As has been explained this morning, the national goals, the directive principles, the basic law, the underlying law, all have to be considered in interpreting our laws, unless those laws are specifically carved out. Unless any of those, constitutional laws are specifically carved out of our statutes, which some of them are, but the scope is there, and there's an exercise going on in PNG to codify customary law, so that might help.
Yeah, thank you for the question. When I look at the Aboriginal Peoples Act, the provision, it doesn't give any room for views or perspectives from the Aboriginal community. So that is wrong. The provision itself is wrong. So as a result of that, the federal government do not feel obligated to consult or to get comments, views from the community. But having said that, there's a lot of pressure from stakeholders, from NGOs, from environmental groups, from international bodies, regardless of what the Aboriginal Peoples Act says, that there should be consultation, there should be some form of discussion. It happens on a very piecemeal approach. Some corporations some projects, there's some consultation, some discussion. And just as I was speaking to one of the delegates here, sometimes what happens is too short a period of time is given to the community to go through the impact of the project. So that is also, on paper, yes, there's negotiation, there's discussion, but it's not realistic. And a lot of terminologies are being used. The illiteracy level of the Aboriginal people stands at 66%. So they will take a longer period of time to understand the contents of the documents. So you cannot just hand over the documents and say, we give you 2 days, we give you 1 week, we give you 2 weeks to read this out. Somebody have to come down to their level to explain things and speak in their language, in the sense that it is a level playing field. So regardless of what the legislation says, there is a lot of pressure, but the pressure is not it's not obligatory enough for the government to negotiate. Thank you.
Just a few words on kind of what's happening in New Zealand so at the moment, the main environmental law makes allowance for iwi's views, consulting iwi. Iwi are Maori tribes, and for tikanga Maori, which is customary Maori law, and that is part of New Zealand law. We are in the middle of a generational reform of these environmental laws, and at the moment, from the drafts, it looks quite likely that the new laws would allow less Maori participation and less input. So watch this space and on your question on GDP, I for one agree, and I think that it's quite unusual. I mean, I'm not sure if it's necessarily unusual. I'm not an economist, but I think it's strange when you're calculating how much money you're making, you're not calculating how much money it costs if you destroyed something. And that's, I guess, still working? I come from the perspective of a polluter pays. Like if you've done damage, you need to pay for it. I've mentioned before that actually at the moment, and it's really unfortunate in New Zealand from a political perspective, there stopped being a consensus that polluter pays is a good idea. I never thought I will see that happening, but hey, things are going on. Whoop. Yes, and then, is this still working? Sometimes. Okay, sorry. I'm not sure what I'm doing to make it not work anymore. But otherwise, I think that that's a good principle to take into account and to discuss. And one of the ways I've also sometimes raised it, especially with businesses who don't seem to believe that there's anything for them to pay, is that if they had to replace whatever the environment gives them for free, say good quality water that is not polluted or good quality air, that is humanly possible today, technologically, it would just cost them a lot of money to do it. You can scrap air and make it breathable and take the CO2 out. That's technology we already have, and it's being used in submarines. As probably a lot of people here know, submarines cost a lot of money. So if you want to do that on a large scale, it would cost you a lot of money. So something to consider. But again, probably an economist can answer your question a bit better.
All right. Your call now, Master of Ceremonies. We have time for one or two more or break.
We have time for perhaps one more question. We do have 5 minutes before we break for tea, so we'll take one last question. If you could be direct with your questions. If there's a specific member on the panel who you'd like to direct your question to, please name them and ask.
Hi, my name is Ben Levi. I'm the a climate advisor for a program here in economic partnership in PNG. A question for my colleague from Aotearoa. Insurance retreat, that's an interesting one. Insurance retreat appears to be an early warning signal of systemic climate risk. My question is, what practical steps should countries like Papua New Guinea take now, particularly in land use planning, infrastructure, investment, and regulation to avoid reaching a point where communities and economic assets become uninsurable? Thank you.
That's a very big question. Maybe we can talk more afterwards as well. The short answer, some of the things that have been tried, and bearing in mind this isn't a New Zealand only issue, have been managed retreat. So kind of discussing with communities what they would like to do. I know that in New Zealand, literally some communities have preferred to stay where they are. And at the end of the day, it ends up being a policy decision, which way do you want to go? The options that our government at the moment has been looking at are things like buying people out, buying land in those areas, so basically compensating the owners. That is assuming that they would like to leave. Otherwise, one of the really interesting parts of your question, if I heard it right, was around infrastructure, is that there is an element where you are meant to, as a government, offer roads for up to settlements, even if those settlements are in remoter areas, and then maintain them. So you're basically, if you have communities that live in areas that will end up being subject to flooding and so on, you are likely to have to send emergency services into harm's way to save the people who have chosen to stay at the end of the one-way roads where they are. So it raised, basically in New Zealand, the first discussion of having maybe a climate mitigation act or a climate adaptation act that would deal with managed retreat. There were discussions about 2017, then it kind of got delayed to the next lot of government, and then they kept thinking about it, and then the current government put out a paper that isn't really advancing things much. So we're not any wiser, which is unfortunate, and at the same time you have communities, and a lot of this discussion with insurers has been around brand new development, but there are plenty of existing settlements, like existing cities and streets and so on that have been there for a long time that with climate change are just becoming subject to more floods or landslides. That's another New Zealand special. And it's no magic bullet, but we've tried a few things.
All right. Looks like there are no further questions or comments, and I have been advised by the Master of Ceremony. This is the end of this session now. If you have any further questions to ask, the distinguished panel will be available during tea break. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure now to announce the departure of our distinguished panel, and please put our hands together and thank them for their expertise. Thank you.
If we could just ask the panelists to remain the international participants, there's some gifts for you from the Papua New Guinea Law Society. Ladies and gentlemen, that officially ends session 3. We will resume session 4 at 3:45. Afternoon tea should be served. So please continue the conversation, a lot of thought-provoking questions, very good insights, mix, mingle, network, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
I'm not Miss. Hello, how are you? Good.
My name's Dirk.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you.
Bala, yeah.
Bella?
Yeah.
Hello, how are you? Hello, how are you?
Oh, you're British, yeah.
You're on this panel too?
Yes, I am.
With the biggest panel.
My name is Jackie.
Jackie, pleasure to meet you. Dirk Hines.
That's my first slide.
Duke, you saying that?
Dirk, yes, yes, yes.
See, we can't read.
Oh, it keeps turning around. Sorry, Dirk Hines is my name.
It does that.
It's got my name, my company correctly. It's specifically when it works the organisation.
Don't worry, nobody will.
I mean, what the judge say? No one wants to do these speeches anyway, so.
Instead of
The biggest panel. Smallest audience.
I-
I do hope
those who want to know whether
I hope they just do Q&A with us. I much prefer just a Q&A session.
I like questions.
the original
Yeah.
statement, I have
Yeah.
to say that I wasn't there when George Washington made the statement.
15.
15.
But
It's
if
however
10
long.
is fine. Where's the moderator?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Jackie, you're first, yes? Last. Okay. You're first. Okay.
I was going to.
Oh,
agree with
madam,
you.
wait, I just, hold on, eh?
that's me.
Melinda.
Yes,
Thank you.
how do
Who you going to go first?
Unless anybody else wants to.
No, no.
I'll go
Okay.
first, 'cause
So
I'm
you
not-
will sit yours, eh?
For me, I'll do like that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, but I was going to suggest, before you go, I was going to suggest that you don't bother to read out all the
I've
biographies.
been doing this for ages, I know. My first slide is a lady with a candle there.
Good. Because we were talking about this earlier. We
I
thought,
know,
you
I know, I know. I used to moderate here once 7 cabinet ministers with 2 protocol officers. No, I know, I know. Melinda, I actually think you
You want me to do your brief introduction?
just make it too brief. But let everybody come in first.
Yeah.
Let's start, there's nobody here.
But you're very brave. Take on the
If there's anyone else outside, I'll ask if you could come in for our last and final session. It's been a long day, but we're getting there. Just a few housekeeping. We will wrap things up at 5:15 this afternoon. If I could ask all practitioners, junior or young, who have been practicing anywhere between 0 to 10 years, if you could make your way to the bar to have a meet-up with President for the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, Mr. Thiron. Our next session examines emerging threats to the environmental rule of law, including challenges posed by resource development, environmental governance, and the protection of human and environmental rights. We're privileged to have as our moderator, Mr. Jayabala Krishnan. Mr. Jayabala Krishnan is a highly experienced lawyer with more than 3 decades of practice, spanning corporate law, commercial litigation, regulatory compliance, and governance across Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. He is also a recipient of the Papua New Guinea's National Logu Medal for service to community and charity. Please join me in welcoming our moderator.
Okay. Thank you, Master of Ceremony. I got a lot of housekeeping to do, and I've just spoke to these 7 distinguished guests, and I had this task of now moderating 7 people. The one earlier was 4, so we brought extra chairs, and the Master of Ceremony has to go and sit somewhere there because we can't put another chair here. So that was the first housekeeping, okay? And I've spoken to all of them. They said they don't want their bio to be read out. Okay, they said we all passed the law exam. We are literate enough to read the pamphlet that was given. Is that okay? All right, but I've done some research, so some of the few highlights of them I might just mention. So they all will present at the same time. I mean, they will present consecutively, and then towards the end, you ask the question. Is that okay? Okay. That's my slide there. Can we put that one in? Okay. I thought with all the statistics that you all saw the whole day, at this hour, most of us are thinking about going to the bar. But I thought if I put a picture of a canoe, and those who are staying in this particular hotel might know where that photo is. Does anyone recognize where is it? Not you, no? Okay. Now, I won't take, because I normally speak, but the LAWASIA says there's no room for you to speak, so I'm just going to be an MC today, or moderator. So this one was, after flying for 2 hours, I went to the bar at Hilton. As I was drinking, I saw this photo. And today, after having heard all this, it struck me, could be in Western Province. Deputy Chief, is this in Western Province? Yeah, the chief is not here, I think. Oh, Deputy Chief Justice, oh, he's not here. So anyway, I think this is Western Province. I've been there before. That's I actually put this in my status. It moves in? Does it move?
Let me try.
What's up? I got a lot of, okay, there you go. No, not this one. Can we go back? Can we go back? I want the first one. Another one. No, another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Oh, another one. Where's the other one missing? Oh. Okay, I can remember. Can we put the same photo? Okay. When I put this one, and after having listened to everyone that spoke today, always when I watch CNN, everybody talk about freedom. You know, CNN, freedom. Now I look at this picture, this lady is absolutely at freedom because, as you know, 90% of Papua New Guinean are landowners. So the land provides you whatever you need, the river, the fish. It also gives you protection. You build your hut, you know, all biodegradable and renewable. And on top of this, they don't pay any taxes. So we have to learn to define what is freedom. Yeah, so maybe they have figured it out a long time ago, this is the ultimate freedom. And, okay, hold on. The theme of my talk, their talk, I'm just moderating because I'm used to talk, is threats to the environment rule of law. threats to the environment rule of law. So I thought maybe I only got 3 slides, so I'll do this one. Yeah, can you hear it? Sure. Okay. Okay, so these are some of the quotes I got. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. I mean, it's a serious threat. Environment, asteroids, whatever. Earth is what we all have in common. And I like this one by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring 1962, and said, man is part of nature, and his war against nature is the inevitable a war against himself. That means we're consuming all the resources, you see. And one of them is also the population growth. We have almost 9 billion people now. And the other one is when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. As one of the professors earlier says, we never talk about science. So mine has a little bit of science, so you know. So I hope it doesn't get there. And then the other thing is, you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. That includes all the devices that we have here. And that's one. So the greatest threat to our planet is to believe that someone else will save it. So if you look at your data centers and your AI, they consume a lot of water and electricity. Some of the statistics are quite dreadful, the amount of water they will consume. And that's why a lot of people don't like Elon Musk. I was one of his biggest fans. He's thinking of putting all the data centers in the space. So it means you don't use electricity because you got solar panel 24/7, and you don't worry about the heat. So that's one of his plans going forward. As you know, the AI competition between China and US, so this is heating up. And next one, is there anything else? Oh, not that one, take it that one. Okay. All right. That's my initial mention, and I want to recognize, Chief Justice is here. I want to recognize Chief Justice. I want to recognize our Deputy Chief Justice, John Kerry, and all the judges from Papua New Guinea. I also understand we have with us seven Chief Justices. And one of them is the Chief Justice from Cayman Island. And she's among us today. And she is the first female Chief Justice of Cayman Island. Chief Justice, can you... And she also has broken many records in Cayman Island, being the first female Chief Magistrate. And also a few other jurisdictions, I think, hold on, I have it here. She also was a Chief Justice of Turks and Caicos Island, being the first Chief Justice there as well. So as you can see, the women are slowly breaking the barrier and being the first in Cayman Island. Congratulations. Okay. All right, did I miss anything else? No. That's it. And also, all the other Chief Justices are here. Welcome, distinguished guests, and all of you. Now, we also Madam Melinda has already told me that don't read our bio, and I was not about to read anyway, having done this many times. So, Ms. Melinda Jenke will be the first one to speak. And the irony is, she used to work for a resource company. Subsequently, she taken legal action against the company. Probably she had a conscious attack. So, we all do. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's put a big hand together for Ms. Melinda Jenke. Oh,
Thank you.
And Madam, you have 15 minutes, Ms. Jenke. All right, have you got a clock with you? Can you time it, please? Okay.
Thank you. In 2015, ExxonMobil said they had discovered oil offshore Guyana, South America. Many Guyanese believed that oil would make them rich. I didn't share that view. I used to work for the oil industry. The government of Guyana signed a new deal with ExxonMobil Guyana and two co-venturers, Hess Guyana Limited and the Chinese National Offshore Oil Company, CNOOC Guyana. The Guyanese people suffered their first shock when they saw the deal. Bart Jagdeo, the leader of the opposition then, said, "Our incompetent government trudged in there unprepared, stuck us with a contract that would harm us for decades. They sold our patrimony." However, since becoming vice president, he has defended the deal. The deal allows Exxon, Hess, and CNOOC to take 75% of Guyana's oil for cost recovery and another 12.5% as their profit, and they don't pay Guyana for this. Exxon says they have roughly 11 billion barrels of oil. At current oil prices, that 87.5% is worth more than $818 billion US. Exxon calls their Guyana operations the jewel in the crown. Guyanese citizens have a different view. I have filed 11 cases on behalf of citizens challenging Exxon's jewel in the crown for undermining the rule of law. Law doesn't operate in a vacuum. In The Crown Against the Home Office, ex parte daily, Lord Steyn said, "In law, context is everything. This is our context. Guyana is a carbon sink. Our northern border is the Atlantic Ocean. You can get beautiful sandy beaches all over the world, but we have mud. We are part of the Amazonian Orinoco influence zone, and we have the longest mud coastline on the planet with incredibly rich marine life. Guyana's exclusive economic zone is home to myriad species, from tiny pteropods, less than a centimeter, to giant sperm whales, the creatures with the biggest brains on Earth. Precious marine life under threat. Exxon's environmental impact assessments show that Exxon's petroleum operations produce noise pollution, light pollution, thermal pollution, chemical pollution, greenhouse gas pollution, which causes ocean acidification, and global overheating, leading to the breakdown of the global climate system, not climate change. We're way beyond that. Exxon is drilling 120 miles offshore. The ocean is about a mile deep. The oil is 2 miles below the seabed, under immense pressure. A well blowout could result in an oil spill. Exxon's maps show that could affect Caribbean nations. The Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis says the damage could be over $100 billion. Citizens said, "How do we protect Guyana?" I said, "Use the law." Guyana's Environmental Protection Act provides for management, conservation, protection, improvement of the environment, assessment of economic development on the environment, prevention of or control of pollution, and so on. It provides for EIAs and imposes duties on the Environmental Protection Agency to put into permits conditions to protect the environment. But a weak regulator is a threat to the environmental rule of law. And in one of our cases, the court said the EPA was derelict and had relegated itself to a state of laxity and compounded by a lack of vigilance, putting Guyana and its people in grave potential danger of calamitous disaster. Of the 11 cases filed so far, 10 are judicial review cases to uphold the environmental rule of law and ensure that the Environmental Protection Agency does its duty under the Environmental Protection Act. For me, this is interesting but challenging because I drafted the Environmental Protection Act. To stay within time, I will just give you a few highlights. In Gaskin against the Minister of Natural Resources, Exxon, Hess, and CNOOC, we said that the minister could not give an environmental permit to Hess and CNOOC because they could not give a petroleum production license to Hess and CNOOC because they didn't have an environmental permit, and the law stopped them from carrying out petroleum operations. The Caribbean Court of Justice, our highest court of appeal, ruled against us. But here are the other results of that case. A new legal principle on costs. The judges said that a court at first instance and even the Court of Appeal should not award costs against litigants coming to court in good faith to protect the environment. They said such public spiritedness should be encouraged. This is important because the Attorney General is on record as saying that the court should use costs to stop what he called frivolous and vexatious cases related to the oil sector, specifically naming my clients. Liability for Hess and CNOOC. The court has confirmed that although they don't have an environmental permit, they're liable for an oil spill, just like Exxon, who has the environmental permit. And Hess and CNOOC, although they did get the petroleum license, they're not allowed to carry out petroleum operations. If they do, the court says Exxon will be exposed to criminal sanctions because they are the permit holder. The court also imposed higher standards for public behavior. They said good governance, fairness, and the utmost transparency must be observed. And information about policies and decisions, applications, and applicants must be readily made available to the public. Without that, we can't uphold the environmental rule of law. Meanwhile, the EPA was granting Exxon environmental permits for 20 years or more. But page 191 of the law and the regulations restricts environmental permits to 5 years. And in Thomas against EPA and Exxon, the court cut the permits down to 5 years in line with the regulations. Now, Guyanese are very concerned about the impact of an oil spill. In Collins and White and against Exxon and the EPA, we said Exxon has unlimited liability under the permit. The court agreed, and they said Exxon has unlimited liability for all costs associated with cleanup, restoration, and compensation. And they said Exxon had to provide an unlimited parent company guarantee and an indemnity to the government. Exxon appealed. The EPA appealed against the conditions which it had put into the permit. And the Attorney General joined the appeal against the decision which required Exxon to provide an indemnity for the benefit of the government. The Court of Appeal upheld the High Court's decision that Exxon had unlimited liability, but ruled that the guarantee could be limited to a reasonably credible estimate. The clients are unhappy with this decision, and we have obtained leave to appeal to the Caribbean Court of Justice. In Dean Hughes and Radzik against the EPA, Exxon, and the Attorney General, we said the EPA did not follow the law when granting the environmental permit for a pipeline. The three respondents said the permit is lawful. The judge disagreed, and she said Exxon had not put in the relevant documents and the permit was not properly granted. The Attorney General said that the applicants, my clients, were meddlesome busybodies and obstructionists to a project of high national importance. The judge disagreed. She said the case raised important issues, and the applicants, in seeking to vindicate the rule of law, ought to be viewed as public benefactors. Another victory for the environmental rule of law. In Thomas and EPA, we argued that the EPA had acted unlawfully in granting an environmental permit for a waste oil and gas process facility without requiring an environmental impact assessment. That case was brought to protect an African Guyanese community with ancestral land. The judge struck down the permit. I now turn to two cases in which Morris and Marcus, two grassroots women, have brought to ensure Scope 3 emissions are addressed in the EIA for Exxon's Hammerhead project. The first case the judge dismissed, but ruled that under Section 11.4, the Scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions, and an EIA must identify, describe, and evaluate their impact. After the Hammerhead EIA was completed, Morris and Marcus went back to court and said, the EIA still does not comply with the law on Scope 3. The judge, a different judge, made a declaration that Section 11.4 requires the EIA to identify, describe, and evaluate Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions as indirect effects, and ordered the EPA to comply with the law, noting somewhat wryly that the applicants had examined the February EIA, 4,232 pages and found no statement satisfying Section 11.4. She also ordered the EPA to follow the statutory procedure for public consultation, and her final order was that they had to do all of this as a condition precedent to Exxon carrying out physical work such as drilling or installing infrastructure. The EPA and Exxon have appealed. Guyana's law requires judges to give a decision not later than 120 days from the date of the hearing. In Gaskin, the acting Chief Justice took 1 year to give her decision, and in Henry, Naguir and Torrington against the EPA and Exxon, a case challenging flaring, she took more than 17 months to rule that the law does not prohibit flaring. Judicial delay undermines the rule of law. A less obvious but very serious threat to the environmental rule of law arises when judges are not familiar sufficiently with the science. In Guyana last year, in a keynote address to judges and lawyers on climate change and the courts, a global perspective, Lord Carnwath, a former UK Supreme Court judge, said, "One of the crucial roles of judges is in forcing politicians to face up to scientific reality. But that means courts must also face scientific reality." Courts generally rely on the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In Milieu Défoncé against Royal Dutch Shell, the Dutch court said, IPCC reports about the impacts of temperature increase and greenhouse gas concentrations represent the best available scientific findings. That is incorrect. IPCC reports are not science. They're literature surveys of scientific studies, including studies produced by the fossil fuel industry. ExxonMobil has even boasted that its scientists author IPCC reports. When courts rely on the IPCC reports, they're not making decisions on the facts, but against them. In his recent book, The Fate of the Earth, Professor Bill Maguire concludes, "We are on track for a world at least 3 degrees hotter than it should be at this moment in its natural history, and heading towards a prehistoric future more wretched than most of us can imagine." Why prehistoric? Because you have to look at the geological record from millions of years ago to understand the impacts of today's rising temperatures and greenhouse gas pollution. Humanity did not exist then. 3 degrees hotter means an overheated planet, places too hot for life, biodiversity extinction, collapse of agriculture, collapse of ecosystems. If there are any survivors to write our history, what will they say about us? Lawyers have to abandon the IPCC and put real science before the court. In Thomas against the Attorney General and Exxon, the biggest climate change case in the world, challenging 5 billion tons or more of greenhouse gas pollution, Dr. Thomas contends that the government is breaching his fundamental constitutional right to a healthy environment by approving petroleum production. We have put in court an expert opinion on the science from Professor Maguire. Illegal activity, regulatory failures, government support for fossil fuels, judicial delay, lack of accurate science in court cases, all undermine the environmental rule of law. Jewel in Exxon's crown, or attack on the environmental rule of law? The answer would seem to be yes to both. The environmental rule of law is the one thing that now stands between humanity and extinction. If we want humanity to survive, we lawyers must uphold the environmental rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melinda Janke. The takeaway from Ms. Melinda Janke is more and more lawyers who work for multi-corporation must have conscious attacks. So the environment will be safer because they'll get sued. Now, we have 2 other speakers. Before I introduce them, I just want to have a small joke. There was a shipwreck, and 3 people made it to the shore. Chief Justice came in and is smiling. Before I go that, I want to, for those of you who notice that I missed the Chief Justice's name. Her name is Margaret Ramsay Hale. I only mentioned Chief Justice. My obsessive compulsive disorder has mentioned to me just now, you miss her name. Okay. Now, the three of them were shipwrecked, starving, but they can see the ship. Because this is very relevant to these two speakers. That's why I picked this joke. So they got the doctor to go first to the ship to swim in and get some food. But it's shark infested. He never made it back. Then they sent the engineer. He never made it back as well. But the minute the lawyer get in, the sharks swim across him, escorted him to the ship, waited for him to take all the provincial and came back. So often, listening to the professor there, lawyers are often depicted as cutthroat, sharp practice. Often many are, and not many will get a conscious attack. Now, if you look at Mr. Dirk Hens, he has volunteered for 14 months as an environmental lawyer in Solomon, correct? Yes. So let's give him a big round. I don't think so many lawyers will go and volunteer. And I think with him, assisting him is William Candy, is that correct? And they're both going to present jointly, and they have 15 minutes. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Sorry, I'll just start my timer so I don't run over and risk the ire of the moderator. Before I start, I just wanted to say something in defence of all the lawyers in this room. Any lawyer professor will tell you there are 8 planets in our solar system. You don't count Pluto because it's a dwarf planet, but the number of planets in our universe is likely infinite because the universe is constantly expanding. But that's the end of my lesson in astrophysics, and now we'll talk about environmental defence. I'll start by saying this is not a presentation on analysis of the rule of law. It really is kind of a journey of anecdotal stories that William and I, working together over the last 10 years, have picked up kind of on the front lines of doing environmental defence, mostly in the environmental damages space. So hopefully at the end of it there's some takeaways for people also doing that kind of work in the Pacific, and I'll let William give you a quick overview of what we are going to talk about.
Thank you, Dick. In the line of work we do, I first work as a lawyer with the Public Solicitor's Office in the Solomon Islands. And within that office, we have a small unit. At the time when I was there was only 3 of us, lawyers, that looks after the landowners advocacy and legal support unit. And that was in the year 2017 that I went into that office. And I also want to take this time to acknowledge those 2 lawyers that have initiated the proceedings. This is the case that we'll be discussing here is the Wagena bauxite mining case, where a small island in the Solomon Islands fought off the bauxite mining company. And also the other case that we'll discuss here is the Reynolds oil spill case, which is still ongoing, and we're still working on that. And that case came right towards the tenure of my time with the Public Solicitor's Office. And when I went to work in the private practice, I take that case with me to continue to represent it, basically because after the spill in 2019, nothing has been done, so we just took it up from 2025 onwards. So these are the 2 cases we'll be discussing. Basically, just to summarize our experiences in the Solomon Islands working in the environmental law space, it's a very difficult path, especially for offices like the Public Solicitor's Office, lack of fundings, budgets, to cover the operations of logging and mining across different parts of the Solomon Islands. That's very difficult. And to have 2 free lawyers to provide legal service for majority of the communities, that's one of the biggest challenges. Also, we noticed the biggest power disparities between these parties, communities, villages that we represent, and the corporations that bring in investments into Solomon Islands. So that's one of the biggest challenges in this space. Also, being innovative, we have to work with community, civil society organizations and NGOs. And I would also like to take this time to acknowledge that the Center for Environmental Law and Community Rights here in Papua New Guinea, that we worked with, and we've communicated over the time from the years around 2017, and we still keep in touch. So with this sort of innovation and arrangements we had, we hope we might cover briefly just a space of environmental law in Melanesia.
Skip over that one and get straight to the case. The story of the case of Solomon Bauxite versus the people of Wagina starts with the people themselves. So the people of Wagina were originally inhabitants of the Gilbert Islands in modern-day Kiribati, and in 1938 they were moved to the Phoenix Islands, also in Kiribati, under the pretense that the years of drought was not conducive to the ongoing viability of the community. Now, there's also rumours that go around that the British actually wanted to use those islands for hydrogen bomb testing, which it's documented they did do. But no matter which sort of historical record you prefer, neither is a good one. I mean, you've either got the first example of the first case of climate refugees in the world, or you've got the first case of people displaced for weapons testing. So in 1960, this population of these Gilbertese inhabitants were then moved again to Solomon Islands, to an island called Wagina, and at that time Solomon Islands was under British colonial rule. Wagina was uninhabited, so they were taken there, a community of a few hundred people, and left to start a community again in 1960. And they did that for the best part of 50 years, but the key element to all that, and one of the biggest issues of the many issues of what I've just sort of talked about, is that as non-Indigenous Solomon Islanders, they did not have standard customary land rights over the land they were on. So that became a key issue in challenging the award of a mining lease over the land that the Solomon Islands government gave in 2012, and Willie will give a quick rundown of that case.
So, well, the bauxite mining company was started doing prospecting around the years 2012. Those days I was still in law school, and so the lawyer who was in Lalsu, was my former colleague, Mrs. Martha Manaka. She's now in the University of the South Pacific teaching there, and an Australian volunteer under the Australian Volunteers Program. I think that's how we met. You probably might be wondering, but from 2012 until so it took from 2012 until 2021 until we completed the case. So you can see it came in very much at the middle, but towards the EAC proceedings. How it happened is, under the environmental law of Solomon Islands, we have an environmental advisory committee that was provided for there. But basically, that's it. And implementing that is the challenge at that time. So what we did, or what my former colleagues did, was to apply to the High Court for judicial review, get positive injunction, order the minister, set up the environmental advisory committee, and then we hear this case. So that's how the Environmental Advisory Committee from the Solomon Islands came about for its first time ever, since being put there on paper, on legislation. And so in 2019, we completed the proceedings, the first ever Environmental Advisory Committee merits review with the help of the Environmental Defender's Office. We put together submissions before the committee. So the decision came out in 2019. One of the significant part of the decision which I really want to highlight is where the committee find that Solomon Islands deserve the highest level of scientific rigor when carrying out environmental impact assessments. And yes, so it was appealed later by the company to the minister, as that was the appeal procedure under the Act, and the minister defended the Environmental Advisory Committee's findings and review, and that set one of the greatest precedents for Solomon Islands, challenging development consents granted to big corporations, especially in the mining space. However, there's still a challenge because the mining lease, which almost took me to court myself, I almost got sued for that personally because by the company because of the work that we do, where we also help to disclose to the minister that the financiers of this mining lease had went insolvent in Hong Kong. So it took us sometimes to resolve that. We didn't go to court, fortunately, but yeah, that's how it got resolved. Just towards the end of that, we ran into another problem. It's a bigger one now, and that's what we're able to talk about now. So.
This is a case that's currently ongoing, which we spurred from a 2019 oil spill in a place called Rennell Province in Solomon Islands. There had been a mine operating on Rennell since 2014, and by its own admission, the Solomon Islands government had said that the oversight of that mine had not been up to standard. So you were seeing, as mining practices went on, a lot of environmental harm being done to the environments down there. So the kind of writing was on the wall ahead of this incident in 2019. And in 2019, when loading bauxite from the mine, the MV Solomon trader encountered Cyclone Oma, came through the region and pushed the ship onto the reef, spilling about 300 tonnes of oil onto the reef of Kangava Bay. Now, like lots of Melanesia, that is customarily owned land, so the persons affected were the customary landowners of that land. And William and I were in Solomon Islands at the time. We did some early kind of work to try and assess the damage, and then provided that to the Solomon Islands government and the Australian government and other stakeholders, and my time in Solomon's finished, so I went home. Sort of 2 or 3 years later, we had assumed that someone would take up the claim, but no one had, so I just sort of said to William, we're both working in the private space at that time, would you be interested in starting it up? So that's kind of what we did. We just sort of started fumbling our way through this claim. The Solomon Islands government had tried to bring a claim, but had not sort of pursued it beyond a certain point. So the first step was for William to actually get the landowners on board, which was making sure they agreed for us to act, and they knew that we would be taking this on pro bono and what that would entail. So putting the claim together itself kind of was just an exercise in learning the law again. It had been framed by the Solomon Islands government to claim under what's called the Bunkers Convention, which is a very convenient international convention whereby if a state is a party to that convention, that state can access a pool of funds for bunker oil spills in their waters. Now, Solomon Islands was not a party to that convention at the time, so for whatever reason, the government decided not to pursue the claim. But when we looked at it again with fresh eyes in 2023 or 4, we noticed that there was a clear tort claim, like a negligence claim, a simple negligence claim, which was our first sort of head of claim. And secondly, once we started diving deeper into the laws of the Solomon Islands, and I think the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice talked about this today, was that there were laws that were there. There were laws that were there that people hadn't visited at the time. We found buried in some marine shipping pollution regulations, direct action against the insurer of the ship, which we've also put in the claim. And our biggest issue with the claim became, once we started doing it in 2024, we had a statute of limitations clock against us, essentially, because 6 years had almost passed since the incident occurred. So there was a mad rush trying to get people on board, and I think that is a key takeaway for anyone in the environmental defence space, is like, just go out and lean on all the contacts you have, because we pulled in people who we'd never thought would help us, based in the UK, like leading climate litigation lawyers said they would give us their time pro bono. We spoke with the government about becoming co-claimants and joining our landowner claimants in the claim, and they said they would do that. We sourced legal representation out of Australia to represent the government, to be co-claimants, and all of this was happening on spec for the best part of a year and a half. So we finally did file the claim with about 2 days left on our statute of limbs clock, which was crazy. And then once we filed it, we were like, okay, so what now? Like, how do we actually bring it? And that's when the conversation came in, talking about litigation funding, and whether or not we could draw on litigation funding to help us bring this case along. And we started that road, which is very unfamiliar to William and I, sort of talking to litigation funders about funding the claim. And essentially, they're investors. They look at a claim, you present it to them, why you think it's a winning case, and they decide to invest or not. And now that we've secured litigation funding, and we're pursuing the claimants for a total claim of I think USD 52 million in damages, which is the biggest environmental claim in Solomon Islands court history. So I think we've kind of gone over time, and I will just kind of skip to some.
You can have another 5 minutes if you want.
Okay. So.
There's two of you anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So.
The last 5 minutes, time yourself.
Yeah. I think. Thank you for that, moderator. One of the highlights of this, of how the experiences we had in this space, is that I think for the Wagina case, it sort of opened up public environmental litigation. These people were not landowners. They own very small parcels in the periphery of the island. The whole island was owned by the government. It's crown land, and so they are about to mine 60% of the land. And these people are much more familiar with the ocean because they are from Kiribati. And so they were into seaweed farming, and that's what their main concern is. That's why the Public Service Office had to find a way and see how we can assist them. Which took at least 7 long years to go through the court, where this quasi-judicial space as well, and then managed to get that secured. So now I think the value of seaweed for Wagina farmers, I think last year they have raked in about 31 million SBD for the value of the seaweed. And I think it's continuing to grow, so that's a great thing, but we still have to face challenges. There are still new mining companies interested to come back and mine in the island, so that's sort of an ongoing issue, which I've moved away from the Public Services Office, but I continue to provide pro bono advice for the communities in Wagina for this. Also for Reynolds, I think the oil spill was a direct result of loading bauxite, which is from a mining operation in Reynolds, and that was poorly regulated as well. And then the mining company left. So the other aspect of the mining operation in Reynolds is still a huge mess. But we decided, okay, we go after the spill, and then we'll see how the mining list will be dealt with. We also understand that they've sort of acquired large chunk of the island for the lease itself. So there's just a lot of challenges that we find and see in these spaces. And I think I'd say without the collaboration that we have with people like Evelyn and Vicky from Selco, the team from EDO, and assisting us and having this coordination, I think we'll never get this far. But, and I think the assistance, especially for Wagina, how the courts have assisted for us to sort of order the minister to make sure we have the advisory committee to sit and listen to that claim. I think that's huge.
Thank you, Dick Haynes and William Candy. Both of them have posed us a very important question. How many of us here can live without a handphone? If we shut down all the mining company, you can't make new phones. So there has to be a great balancing act. And all the phones that we have, a single large AI data center can consume up to 5 million gallons of water. Over 1 gigawatt hour of electricity per day. That's why Elon Musk wants to have it in the space with a solar panel. A large AI data center consumes up to 5 million gallons, 19 million liters of water daily, enough power to supply over 100,000 homes. Okay. Our next speaker is, I speak Bahasa, so I call him Inche, is the same as Mr. Mr. Mimin Dwi Hartono. I cakap bahasa sikit. I seek the permission from the audience to speak my one talk language a bit. He's from Indonesia, but I'm originally from Malaysia. Apa kabar dan selamat datang ke Papua New Guinea. So I said, how are you and welcome to Papua New Guinea. So I invite now Mr. Mimin Dwi Hartono to come and present his paper. Tolong 10 minit, 10 minit saja. Okay, you check out. Okay, terima kasih. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Honorable Chief of Justice, Honorable Judge, and also ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to speak maybe more broad issue, and it's about the policies that already mentioned before, but maybe it is also important to to know and we have understanding about this issue. So I would like to speak about COP30 or Conference of Parties and Indigenous People right to the environment in the way forward. Okay, maybe some of you already familiar about COP. So COP30 at a glance is, it was held in 2025. It was make a historic moment because it was held in the heart of the Amazon in Belém, Brazil, home of the world's largest tropical rainforest and many group of indigenous people. So there were a progress such as visibility of indigenous people and LC IPP or local community and indigenous people platform, which is developed during the previous COP. Throughout negotiation when 5,000 IPs delegation participate, so it was the largest participation of indigenous people in the world. Second, the pledge for international land tenure commitment to recognize and protection of indigenous land rights as a climate solution and collectively recognize and strengthen land tenure right for 160 million hectares of indigenous and local communities' lands. But there were also some challenges. The first is financial gap, where pledge for indigenous land climate fund remain underfunded, and the second is accountability, in which civil society pressed for building FPIC or free prior informed consent, safeguard in any climate change initiative. So climate justice and indigenous right. Disproportionate impact, indigenous people contributes least to emission but face severe climate impacts, threatening social economic right, sacred land, and also cultural survival. Green economy risk, renewable energy, carbon offset, including the carbon trading. This is very famous, and conservation project can cause displacement due to the FPIC is ignored. So in this context, indigenous people face double vulnerability at least because they face both climate impact and also risk from false climate solution. So what we need is a just climate transition where it must be right-based. No climate or conservation projects should proceed on indigenous territories without meaningful participation, transparency, accountability, and genuine FPIC. It is in the picture when we were in North Kalimantan, so we are advocacy with the Minister of Environment and Forestry to recognize the customary right in the region of Kalimantan, East Kalimantan, Borneo. Indigenous people in the UN climate regime, so the Paris Agreements in 2015 recognized the importance of indigenous people knowledge and traditional knowledge in addressing climate change, and call for respect for human rights and the right of indigenous people. LCIPP also established under the UNFCCC or UN framework for climate change to strengthen the exchange of knowledge, practices, and perspective, and to facilitate indigenous participation in climate policy. However, sadly, that its role is remain largely facilitative and advisory, yet give indigenous people formal decision-making authority. It is also in Baku Work Plan during COP29 in Azerbaijan. It is adoption of the work plan 2025 to 2027 that seek to strengthen the engagement of indigenous people and local community in climate processes, including knowledge sharing, reporting, implementation, and participation. So indigenous people are increasingly present in the climate negotiation, but the presence does not necessarily mean power due to limited influence. So what we need is participation as a decision making rather than a consultation. So what we are trying now is to shift indigenous people from stakeholder to the right holder. So it is already mentioned in several human rights instruments, such as I can mention just a few, like ILO Convention number 169. It is required states to undertake good faith consultation with indigenous people, ensuring an effective participation, protect their rights, and provide safeguard against forced displacement and support equitable benefit sharing. UNDRIP also, in 2007, indigenous people, UN Declaration on Indigenous People, recognizing indigenous people as collective right, where they have right to their land, their territories, resources, culture, and self-determination. And the third one is Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework 2022. It is also recognized the important role and right of indigenous people and local communities in biodiversity conservation, including in regard with the climate change. So the shift must be from indigenous people as vulnerable. It's not enough to see indigenous people as a vulnerable, but we need to see them as a right holder. They have right holder, they have legal right holder with collective right. They can enforce claim to their land, territories, resources, and participation when they are violation. And there are three landmark advocacy opinions. Strengthening indigenous climate justice is also strengthening the role of indigenous people in terms of climate justice. and climate environmental justice. The ATLAS advisory opinion, the International Tribunal for the Law on the Sea, obligation of state to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution caused by anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. Inter-American Court of Human Rights, in their advisory opinion in 2025, also strengthening the relationship between human rights and climate change and the right to have healthy environment. It also emphasized state to have obligation to protect people from any harm that created by climate change. And the third one is ICG Advisory Opinion 2025. It also already mentioned by previous speaker. It is also as a legal basis. Even though it is only advisory opinion, but it is still powerful as an advocacy tool for indigenous people and also for those who work in human rights protection. So climate change is not only environmental and policy issue, it's already a matter of legal obligation and human rights issue too. Okay, so is what we know trying to advocacy is toward human rights-based climate and environmental justice. There are several, okay? There are several principles that must be recognized under the human rights-based climate and environmental justice. I just mentioned a few because the director already give me, okay. The first is strengthening the FPIC, of course, and no discrimination and equal participation, right to effective, it is very important, right to effective remedy, how we provide accessible and judicial and non-judicial mechanism for IPs who affected by climate change. For example, by our colleagues from Guyana, how they can have right to obtain remedy from any corporation, from the state, and from the regional and international mechanism. And also, of course, the intergenerational justice is very important because it is to measure that we are not working for ourselves, but we are working for the next generation. And we will have COP31 just a few months ahead, that in Turkey. Maybe some of you will coming. So it is some recommendation that we need to advocate during the COP31 in Turkey. So we need to make a FPIC as binding proposal, not only voluntary but binding in any climate change negotiation. We need also to establish the independent indigenous people right monitoring mechanism in order the indigenous people has their own mechanism to claim the right and also to require human rights impact assessment for any climate negotiation, including national determinant contribution. So, also to integrate UNDRIP in any climate framework, including Paris Agreement. This is a very powerful instrument for the indigenous people. And also, of course, the last one is to establish an effective grievance and remedy mechanism, to create mechanism that accessible for the people when they are violated their right, they can claim and they can have a remedy such as restitution, compensation, and also environmental restoration. I think that's from my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and your passion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Encik Mimin Dwi Hartono. Banyak terima kasih. So thank you very much. Okay, I just want the General Assembly to give me to pass a resolution, whether we can extend it from 5:15 to 30. As you know, Justice Janet Kalmar just arrived this morning, and she has decided to speak last so that she can really calm her nerves all after the long flight. And these two ladies from one of the top established law firms will speak. They have each 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Our distinguished judge has got 15 minutes. Now, if I stick to that time schedule, that we can't take any questions. And we got such a beautiful, distinguished panel. What say you if we can extend until 5:30? Is it okay? I know there's a dinner at 6:30, Is it okay? Yeah, maybe 5, 20, 25, okay? All right. Okay, so now I'll invite Ms. Ilona Miller from Tobin, Sydney, Australia. Is one of the big law firms there. Would you come forward, Ilona Miller? And I will time you, or you will time yourself. Okay, I'll reset it. There you are, it runs.
Great. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right to the point for our presentation, which, here we go. There we go. Whilst the topic is threats to the environmental rule of law, I would like to look at something that is potentially also an opportunity to elaborate on the principles of the environmental rule of law. And I'll start by just talking about carbon markets as being one of the emerging practical instruments to advance both climate mitigation and sustainable development across the Asia-Pacific region. These markets create financial activities for financial incentives for activities that reduce or remove greenhouse gas emissions. But the key here is that the effectiveness and integrity of carbon markets does depend on a strong environmental rule of law. Without the appropriate legal and regulatory safeguards, carbon markets do risk undermining the environmental rule of law and the objectives that they are intended to support. But designed well, they can be a very effective tool to deliver on climate mitigation and adaptation. In Papua New Guinea, we have seen recent legal and regulatory reforms that are signalling a new phase of carbon market engagement. This presentation that Lily and I will deliver provides an overview of carbon market principles and examines PNG's evolving legal architecture and pathways to operationalise credible, equitable and enforceable carbon market participation that supports both climate goals and local sustainable development outcomes. We'll start with a brief setting of the context in terms of how carbon markets fit with the environmental rule of law, and then provide an overview of how the markets work, some of the fundamental principles that underpin those markets, and then with this scene set, Lily will discuss some of the recent developments here in Papua New Guinea, the opportunities for international collaboration, and learnings for the Asia-Pacific region. So starting with the relevant principles of the environmental rule of law. The IUCN Declaration identifies the environmental rule of law as a prerequisite for effective environmental governance and sustainable development. It recognises that environmental protection must be grounded in clear and enforceable legal frameworks, respect for fundamental human rights, and strong institutions capable of accountability, compliance, and fair dispute resolution. Together, these elements provide the foundations for addressing growing environmental challenges in a manner that is just, transparent, and predictable. The Declaration establishes some key principles. Importantly, that environmental protection extends beyond compliance with environmental law to encompass substantive obligations to safeguard nature, recognise environmental rights, respect Indigenous and tribal peoples' interests, and ensure that legal frameworks are effectively implemented in practice. So linking this then to carbon markets, as you are all aware, the Paris Agreement sets the goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees while pursuing efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees. As the global push to reduce emissions and to meet the temperature goal accelerates, businesses and governments are facing increased pressure to materially lower their emissions and to work towards net zero commitments. All parties to the Paris Agreement are required to submit nationally determined contributions, and just on this slide focusing on the Asia-Pacific, the ambition of these commitments is notable. Just by way of example, here in Papua New Guinea, that commitment is to reduce emissions by 50% below 2015 levels by 2030. However, when you look at this list within the region, most of the targets, or at least the most ambitious iterations of those targets, are conditional on international support. These targets create immense demand for credible mitigation pathways at significant scale. While direct emission reductions through decarbonisation remains the preferred approach, certain sectors and activities will continue to generate emissions that are difficult or impossible to eliminate. The IPCC has estimated that the path to net zero by 2050 requires low carbon investments to rise from approximately $900 billion in 2020 to US $5 trillion per year in 2030. Carbon markets, with the right frameworks and guardrails, can rapidly mobilise critically needed private capital for climate change mitigation and adaptation, particularly in developing economies where the most cost-effective mitigation opportunities often lie. So to very briefly explain how carbon markets work in a single slide and hopefully only a minute, these markets facilitate the trade of emission allowances, which represent a right to emit within a specific cap, and or carbon credits, which typically represent the greenhouse gas reductions or removals. And what it does is effectively place a financial cost on pollution, coming back to the polluter pays principle that Anna mentioned before. The resulting revenue from these markets can be used to fund abatement projects and drive finance directly into nature-based solutions and technological climate change and sustainable development activities. It's important to note that there is a distinction between the types of markets that operate and the role that they play. Here we distinguish between the voluntary or independent carbon market and mandatory or compliance markets. In the former, you see companies and individuals freely buying and selling offsets to meet self-set climate goals, whereas under the latter, these are legally binding, government-led schemes under which high-emitting industries are required to stay under specified emissions limits and offset the excess, such as cap-and-trade schemes and also baseline and credit schemes like the one we have in Australia. The voluntary carbon market has historically operated with limited direct regulatory oversight, and this has resulted in integrity questions which has challenged the frameworks upon which carbon markets operate. That said, there have been quite significant steps taken to address these integrity issues, such as the work that's currently underway by the Integrity Council on the voluntary carbon market, which we'll discuss in a minute. Just wanted to sort of show the breadth of carbon market schemes that are operating across the Asia Pacific. Here you can see that there are not only a number of schemes, different schemes operating in both the mandatory and the voluntary space, but also very different approaches in terms of trading schemes, taxes, baseline credit schemes. And then more broadly, globally, we have over 80 different carbon pricing initiatives operating around the world, which cover approximately 28% of global emissions. But bringing this back to the environmental rule of law, what we see is that the environmental rule of law requires strong legal frameworks for environmental justice and protection to be achieved. A carbon credit, when we talk about carbon markets, is a legal construct, and its value rests on rules that are clear, followed, and enforceable. The environmental rule of law is therefore one of the key aspects that makes the product tradable. So coming back to the IUCN Declaration, there are 5 requirements that we see as translating directly into carbon market design. Firstly, they must be governed by clear, publicly accessible rules. Second, participation rights should be secured and meaningful. Third, transparent decision-making is required that's subject to review. And fourth, strong enforcement mechanisms, including offence provisions and revocation powers that need to be in place and enforceable by regulators. And then finally, respect for the affected community's rights with access to effective remedies and grievance mechanisms need to be clear and effective and accessible in practice. So when we bring that back to carbon markets, across the industry there are generally agreed principles which are applied in frameworks for high integrity carbon markets, and these apply across the board at an international level, national programs, and also the independent standards. And these principles are that the emission reductions or removals are real and measurable, that they're additional, that they're permanent, and that they are not double counted. At an international level, we see these principles applied through the 3 cooperative approaches under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And without going into detail on each of these mechanisms, some of those key elements are, for example, in Article 6.2, the importance of corresponding adjustments, so that the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes that are transferred from one country to another are not double counted. And then similarly, in the context of Article 6.4 and Article 6.8, there are clear requirements around demonstrating the contributions that the activities will make to sustainable development and to increased and heightened ambition in terms of compliance under the Paris Agreement. In the voluntary market, we also see clear standards and methodologies that are developed that also introduce and respond to these key principles. And again, without going into too much detail about some of the leading standards like VERA and the gold standard, what is important to note with these standards is that in many developing countries, they represent the primary standards for project development, and there are a number of countries around the world that are leveraging these standards to underpin their own approaches under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. So that connection between the international compliance market and these independent standards is something that is quite important. So coming back to the importance of integrity, what we have seen over the last few years is the ICVCM, or Integrity Council on the Voluntary Carbon Markets, develop core carbon principles which provide for essentially a benchmark which is grounded in science and best practice and sets out the 10 core carbon principles that you can see there. Those principles very much reflect the ones I mentioned earlier around additionality, no double counting, permanence, registry requirements, robust independent third-party validation and verification, and also importantly, they also reference the need to ensure that there's no lock-in of incompatible emissions or practices so that you can see that transition towards net zero. So in summary from my part, what you do see is carbon markets being a means to mobilise private capital for mitigation and adaptation activities that may not otherwise be funded. And designed well, they can bring voluntary and compliance regimes into alignment. But there are also risks. Not all credits will be equal, and companies that are using low carbon credits do face significant legal risks, as well as obviously the lack of integrity in the use of those credits and the credibility of them. So what we need to see are these strong domestic frameworks to address these risks and successfully operationalise carbon markets to uphold environmental outcomes in the environmental rule of law, which is where I'll now hand over to Lily to talk about the developments in Papua New Guinea and what these demonstrate about building in the environmental rule of law into practice.
Just a minute, let me introduce you. I have to introduce Lily. Many of these presentations are found in the LAWASIA website. So if you want to go in detail, you can access them, okay? And Willie, thank you very much, Ms. Ilona Miller. Thank you very much. It was a very insightful presentation on carbon trading. Now we ask Lily Morton. Lily, you want to time yourself, or shall I time you? Okay, 10 minutes, please. All right, thank you. Ms. Lily Morton from Gilbert and Tobin.
Great. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here, and it's great to be in Papua New Guinea, and thank you for the team for all the organisation. So with the international context and market framework that Ilona has just stepped through, and the fantastic well-traversed theory of the environmental rule of law that we've heard from various different speakers today, I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into Papua New Guinea's carbon market, which has recently undergone significant reform to try and strengthen that voluntary carbon market participation that Ilona's just spoken to. Now, PNG does not have a mandatory compliance scheme for heavy emitters at present, just picking up on that delineation Ilona Ilona made, but with the extensive natural resources, including forests and wetlands that PNG has, which require urgent protecting, PNG has strong potential to be a key supplier of high integrity credits to international customers and to utilise carbon markets to access international financing and investment for climate mitigation. Now, the evolution of PNG's carbon markets starts back in the late 2000s with the first iterations of forestry and carbon-related legislation, but most notably in 2015, we saw PNG introduce a principal climate mitigation legislation, the Climate Change Management Act. Now, in 2021, we saw a suite of amendments introduced, establishing for the first time a national registry for carbon projects and credits, a climate change development authority to coordinate trading schemes and issue permits, and a dedicated board to guide and oversee that authority. Unfortunately, still, the industry was facing a lot of integrity concerns, and that's a theme that's been picked up throughout today's presentations. And in response to that, in 2022, the Papua New Guinea government imposed a total administrative moratorium on all new voluntary carbon projects. Now, this was in place for about 3 years, and in April last year, that moratorium was lifted, and subsequently later last year, we saw the Carbon Markets Regulation enacted, which codifies the terms under which the renewed carbon market must operate. Now, the 2025 regulation establishes 5 core components that together create the governance architecture for Papua New Guinea's carbon market. And you'll see a lot of these will pick up on those principles Ilona's just spoken through. So first, it introduced a new permitting system and national register. So any mitigation activity or carbon project must first obtain a permit, and applying for that permit entails preparing and submitting a suite of documents, including evidence that free, prior and informed consent has been obtained and that a benefit sharing agreement is in place to distribute the proceeds from the project with the local customary owners, and I'll turn back to those points in just a moment, that there's requisite government approval, project design details, and that the relevant methodology is in place and details about grievance mechanism. Now, the register is required to detail all details about the permits, and that picks up that integrity point that's also been iterated a lot throughout today's conference, and the importance of transparency. Second, environmental integrity. In discharging its functions under the Act and the regulation, the authority is required to apply, and this is codified in Clause 10 of the regulation, the Paris Agreement's integrity principles. And these include avoiding double counting, quantifying reductions realistically and conservatively, and promoting additionality. Again, those points that Ilona just mentioned from the international framework. Third, carbon rights. The regulations quite distinctly delineate 2 different types of carbon rights, primary and secondary. Now, the primary carbon rights vest in the customary landowners and those with legal rights over the relevant land upon which the project is being developed. And I think we all appreciate now in Papua New Guinea that is almost exclusively customary land right holders. And the secondary carbon rights holders, that confers the entitlement to conduct the activity and to generate, transfer and sell credits. Now, notice the difference between which parties those rights sit with. But that secondary carbon right is subject to a statutory obligation to transfer benefits from and share benefits from the project with the primary carbon rights holder. Fourth, free, prior and informed consent. Again, obviously a really big topic that's been touched on a lot today. And the free, prior and informed consent framework that's been embedded in this new regulation requires that consent be obtained in advance of the project without any coercion, bias, bribery or inducement, information that is accurate, timely, accessible and culturally appropriate, and in a locally understood language. And these pick up a lot of those comments that the Deputy Chief Justice mentioned this morning around free, prior and informed consent and adequate consultation. And also that there be consultation at different stages of that progress, including on the site. Now, lastly, benefit sharing. There's 2 elements to this. Firstly is that 7% of the total credit revenue is payable to the authority itself to assist with that implementation stage, and also that an equitable percentage of the proceeds from the project go towards the primary rights holders and the traditional landowners. Now, the regulations introduce offences for non-compliance with certain regulations, and most importantly, this includes obtaining free, prior and informed consent or a benefit sharing agreement by bribery, coercion, misrepresentation, or false pretense. And this carries a fine of 500,000 Papua New Guinea kina or 2 years imprisonment. There are 3 mitigation pathways that operate within this framework, and the first is the individual project approach under an independent mechanism like the ones that Ilona just touched on. Second is a national approach undertaken by the local government, and the third is an international cooperation approach, facilitating ITMOs under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Now, it's this third pathway, international cooperation, is what connects PNG's domestic framework to global compliance markets and global oversight on framework oversight under the Paris Agreement. PNG's already put a pathway to work through 2 bilateral agreements, one with the first one with Japan, a memorandum of cooperation on the joint crediting mechanism under Article 6.2 in 2022, and the second, more of a second in December 2023, an implementation agreement under Article 6 entered into with Singapore, which functions as a formal bilateral treaty operationalising Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Now, there's significant opportunity presented by the steps that have been taken by the Papua New Guinea to really strengthen its carbon market framework, and this has been in response to significant integrity concerns and implementation challenges. So, the Marobri-Markham Reforestation Project, being the first approved under this new framework in March this year, provides an insight into what this potential might look like. Now, located in the Markham Valley, in the Marobri province, the project aims to restore degraded Kunai grassland through native tree planting, assisted natural regeneration, and sustainable forest management, with a crediting period running from October 2026 to October 2076. The project is being undertaken by a international US project developer who will be the secondary carbon rights holder, with the Namoant Incorporated Land Group as the primary carbon rights holder, representing 17 Indigenous clans in the province. Now, the project leases the lands from the Namoant Incorporated Land Group and commits to a 28% net profit sharing to all clan members. Subject to proper implementation, the project is estimated to remove approximately 23 million metric tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is approximately the equivalent of taking about 18 million cars off the road for a year. However, the framework's credibility will ultimately be subject to implementation, and in this respect, there are 5 challenges that stand out. Firstly, institutional capacity. So the authority will need to adequately oversee free, prior and informed consent processes, permitting, maintain a register, and enforce compliance across what will likely be a growing portfolio of projects. Now, limited technical oversight, resource constraints, delay in processing applications, and interagency coordination can pose challenges to the effective oversight. And these are some of those implementation challenges that have been picked up on throughout today's presentations. Second, customary land is obviously inherently complex. PNG's communal tenure varies across hundreds of language groups and often lacks documentary certainty, and contested landholder identity is where some past carbon projects under RED+ disputes have originated, and it's yet to be seen how that will roll out under the new scheme. Third, verification independence and registry transparency. The credibility of PNG crediting...
She's got 30 seconds.
The credibility of Papua New Guinea generated credits in international markets depends upon registrable adherence to the environmental integrity principles in Regulation 10 and accessible project documentation through the National Registry. So what does PNG's experience offer the Asia-Pacific region and the environmental rule of law? Now, subject to implementation, Papua New Guinea is positioned to demonstrate that carbon markets can operate consistently with Indigenous rights, customary tenure, and the environmental rule of law. And the codification of these international integrity principles, the structural link between carbon rights and customary tenure, the mandatory free, prior and informed consent, and statutory benefit sharing requirements together represent a model for how nations can strengthen carbon market participation while upholding the rule of law. So 3 very quick takeaways and then I'll wrap up. First is the importance of having legal foundations in place that precede market expansion, and that'll ensure that there's transparency and registry integrity that underpin that market credibility. Second, customary and Indigenous rights must be integral and mandatory design features, and that's something we've spoken a lot about today. And third, that market integrity and governance has sufficient institutional capacity for verification, enforcement and dispute resolution. And the challenges Papua New Guinea face, they're not unique, they're shared across many jurisdictions. But carbon markets can be both consistent with the environmental rule of law, where legal frameworks are reinforcing of and have the enforceable standards of integrity, rights recognition, consent and equitable distribution of benefits. Subject to implementation, PNG might be really well placed to demonstrate this, and we will be closely following how the new market evolves. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, Ilona and I are very happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Lily Morton. That was a great presentation, both of you from Gibbon and Tobin, Ms. Ilona Miller and Lily Morton. Thank you for the great presentation on carbon trading. Thank you. Okay, we have someone just came all the way from Africa, long flight, landed this morning. Good. As a judge, she's got 15 minutes. Please bear with her. And most of you have the bio, but I've done an AI search on the Honorable Lady Justice Jacqueline Kamau. She actually studied in India, and she's a first-class honors student when she was studied in India. Yeah. And I also Googled her, sorry, and I want to know, is there any quotation that I can associate with Judge Lady Kalma? She's, I think she must have said, she said, if you do not look after the environment will be your poison. Did you ever say that, Lady Kalma? Okay, thank you. So let's invite the Honorable Lady Justice Kalma to present her presentation. Thank you very much.
So thank you very, very much, everyone, for listening, because I think being the last presenter is going to be a bit of a challenge. Everybody's tired, and everybody has had information overload. So, but I'm going to speak about the integrity of combating noise pollution in Kenya, but I just want to have a disclaimer. One of them being that, as you see me dressed in green, I was not aware the event organizer had chosen green, so I did not have any leakage. I just found myself wearing green because it was a part of...
15 minutes, yeah.
Yes, I have it here. All right. And secondly, I said that maybe the best thing is for us to look and see what is it that affects us also. Because what we have done is that we are looking at what affects the environment. But what affects us? And that's the reason why I want now to talk about this noise pollution. Now, the paper was long because I've prepared a 27-page paper with references, and I think you'll go through it. But I looked at the classifications of noise and what are the outcomes of this noise, what is the legal framework in Kenya, and the emerging jurisprudence and the challenges and what recommendations then I can make. Because this is an area that I think we have all ignored, because we are looking out into the society, what the environment has done, and that kind of thing, but what is other pollution doing to us individually today as you sit here and as you go home. Now, then, of course, I've written the objectives, which I think I'm going to pass because I don't have enough time. But what I wanted to say that there are different sounds which surround us every day. There's the high-pitched sound of a siren from a police vehicle or ambulance. Like today morning, I think many judges, when they were being brought here, there's a lot of noise. Vibrations, of course, you all enjoyed it, but it was a lot of noise for the people who are on the streets. Then there are vibrations from machines drilling the ground or power source felling trees. Then you have the pounding sound from machinery used in excavations. You have the whirring sound of helicopters, which you are going to hear to have a lot in Kenya because of the elections. Because people have to move from one place and the other, and you have to show your might, and having a helicopter also shows that you have the money. You know, just landing and you move from that place and you go to the second place. You have the hooting sound of motor vehicles, especially when you go to India. The first thing that they'll tell you is hoot, okay, please. So you have to hoot. Even if you have nothing to hoot, you hoot. Then the ones who come from the UK, we know about the wheel rail noise that can be described as impact noise, rolling noise, and spike noise. When you're in the underground, the tubes, there's all these noises which are always coming. The people who are staying near the airports, there's the roaring sound of airports taking off. When they're coming and they're screeching at the people who are there. Then we have newborn babies who are shouting and screaming in the houses. We can't sleep. So for the young parents, isn't it? For us old ones, maybe the grandchildren now, who are brought to our houses. So there's shouts from playing children, roaring chants from sports enthusiasts in stadiums, as you can imagine, when during the World Cup, how much noise comes from the stadiums, very, very high. Then you have generators, like if you go to Lagos and Nigeria, a lot of drumming of generators and air conditioning, especially in very, very hot places. Then you have volcano eruptions and that kind of thing. But then we normalize these sounds. And so there you can see noise pollution from a club. People are enjoying, but obviously there are other people who are having headaches as a result of that kind of noise from the club. Then this is also in the street, the noise that you're hearing everywhere, even the sirens, but you can't control it because it's uncontrollable. But you see, we are talking about the environment, we're talking about carbon emissions, gas emissions, we're talking about all those things, but these are things that are affecting us on a daily basis, but we have normalized them and think that it's okay that these things happen. So the noise around us, as you can see, the whole world, there's music, there's sirens from ambulances, there's helicopters, there's vehicles, and many things, and power sources over there. So now, generally, because scholars sometimes say sound and noise is the same, but I just wanted to just say that sound is a sensory perception. But no, it's a sensory perception, but they've described as noise being a mental perception. So if I hear the sound of music, it's sensory, it's sensual. But if it's noise, then I mentally perceive that as an enemy of what ideally should happen. So then noise then is unwanted and may cause adverse effects on human health and environment. So I just want to look and see, I will not go through the definitions, but all that we'll say is that it must exceed typical quantities, it must be for a lengthy period, the conditions then interfere with the comfort of the people, whether it's health-wise or whether it damages the natural resources or alters the ecological balance of an area. So I will not go through those definitions because of the time. I can see I'm at already 4 minutes. But generally, we have what is now classified as noise. So you have the transportation noise, which is the road traffic noise, the railways. And it's only that you're lucky, maybe you're not in a place like this, like when in the UK you're there, and there are houses which are right next to the railways. And they have to endure this on a daily basis. Or the people, I guess, in New York, I've never been there, but I've seen it in the movies. I think it's something that they really have a problem with. Industrial noise, I can see PNG is doing a lot of constructions, and so we expect there's going to be a lot of construction noise. With the places where they're mining, there's going to be a lot of mining. Then there's community noise, where you have a party next door, and people don't even really bother about you. People are staying in apartments, and the whole night people are busy partying. And one time I made sure that I was going to complain in a particular club why they were making so much noise. But when I got there, the music was so nice, I stayed there. Now I said, if I can't beat them, you join them. So every Friday I used to go there because now I couldn't sleep. So the best thing is to go to that place. So we have residential noise, and that's what household activities. There's somebody who is microwaving, the people who is pounding, they're drilling, there's juicing and all that. All this is noise. But we all assume that it is okay. But road traffic noise then has been classified as the most second contributor of noise of noise pollution, because this is actually noise pollution. And despite WHO having given guidelines, we still find that they're largely being ignored, and the governments are not giving enough money or budgetary allocations to this kind of reduction of noise pollution. And so, you know, because of this, because our mental state is important, so it brings noise pollution within the definition of what health is. So what are the outcomes of chronic noise exposure? So you have the hearing buzz, hearing impairment, you have cardiovascular heart attacks, strokes, and hypertension because people are completely stressed out all the other time. You're not sleeping well because we have the sleep disturbance. Mental health issues, you have stress, anxiety, and depression. If you're working in a very loud place, even in a factory, and you're not being able to rest, then you're more likely to get this. Then poor performance in adults and children, then you have poor memory retention, and the children are also not able to, they become hyperactive and have a very aggressive behavior. So these are some of the things that can happen. In as much as we're looking at gas emissions on that side, but within our own communities and within ourselves, this is what happens. So sometimes we have behavioral problems, but they are all as a result of the noise pollution that is going on. So the studies then in the UK in 2018 showed that at least there were over 130 deaths as a result of noise pollution. And that because of the aircraft, the people who stay near the airports like Heathrow. There's a particular decibel that when you're exposed to, then it's likely to interfere with your health. So in Kenya, again, what I saw is that in the studies that have been conducted is that there's been a lot of excessive noise, especially in vulnerable areas where people stay in informal settlements. Now, people are unlikely to have this kind of noise in places where are exclusive because people even have the money to take these matters to court. But the people in the informal sector cannot be able to do that. So then it shows that matatus, and I hope everybody will understand matatus or nganyas. This is what we call the public service vehicles, the ones which take people around. There's a lot of excessive noise, but these vehicles sometimes cost over 100 million US dollars. So they have to play the music to attract the young people to come into the vehicles. If they don't, then young people don't go there. And so that is what you have, one of the nganyas. So it's a music on wheels. And you can imagine that's a van, but the amount of noise that is there. Many times when you're even in the next vehicle outside, this vibration, you actually feel your car vibrating and your heart vibrating and you can't talk or communicate. If anybody calls you, they tell you, I'm in a matatu, so you cannot be able to speak. But the more sophisticated it is, the better it is for you. You get more money back. So what is a legal framework? It's not that we don't have a legal framework in Kenya. We do. So we have the international conventions, and these form part of our law. Any international law, it forms part of our law. We have the Constitution of Kenya, which says it's a right for somebody to have a clean and healthy environment, which also includes not having any pollution. And we have seen noise pollution is also something that we can call pollution. So we have the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, within which we have the noise and excessive vibration pollution control regulations, and the environment impact assessment and audit regulations, so that before you even construct anything anywhere with a lot of noise, then you need to have done this EAIA, just so that at least then you can mitigate these sounds. So what are the emerging jurisprudence? We find that in one case, Ekutan and 6 others in Kenya, because people are getting to know about their rights, their constitutional rights, then the court held that the petitioners had the legal right to legal recourse for environmental degradation, including noise pollution. At least it's being acknowledged. Initially, we've just been doing environmental, but now we know noise pollution is a problem, so people are getting educated. Pastor James, Jesse Gitahi, and others, and 200, because prevention of noise and vibration is a component of a clean and healthy environment. This is what the court has held. Amani residents, in this one, where there are stiff penalties, where the court has done stiff penalties to ensure that that does not happen. But does it happen really? It's still happening. Why? Because there is lack of political goodwill to curb the noise pollution. There is also accuracy of measurements. There's also arguments. Because if we don't have proper machines, it's going to be different levels here in different levels in the UK, different levels in PNG, different levels in Kenya. So we need to have a consistent way in which we can measure this. Corruption, and this comes by way of extortion, bribery, and due influence. And because like now we find clubs are having a lot of music, and matatus are also having a lot of music. But at the end of the day, they are forced to look the other way around so long as you can pay something to the police and the enforcement persons. So improper use of budgetary allocations, even if the money has been given, people will not still consider it as an important problem. So there's lack of awareness, especially in the informal sectors, and so they do not know, even if you find that noise, there's a lot of hooting, they still think that it's okay, and this is the way life is supposed to be. So we also have lethargy in enforcement mechanisms in informal sectors, and this has become a bit of a problem. So if you look at this is a governor, and he says, and noise pollution actually from the churches, and maybe not, let me not say churches, but places of worship, is where there's a lot of noise. It's like competition, because you need people to come to your church, because you need more money. So the more I scream, the more it is better for me. So because of the election year, the governor has said, I won't close churches over noise pollution. And these images, I've gotten them from the website, so you can be able to get from the Google, you can be able to get them. So these are the nganyas I'm talking about. So that costs over 100 million. So for you to be able to recoup that, you need to have very serious music, and it's normally the latest music, and there's videos also, and lights, disco lights inside there. So this is the most expensive one, called the Mood, and everybody, I think, is trying to, because I think this one has a DJ on the decks inside the vehicle. So everybody is going to go for this one, but the older ones might not go, but it's going to damage their ears at some point. So what are the recommendations? So we need to have the strict enforcement of laws and regulations, because they're already there. It's not that we don't have. So we need to have uniformity in the application of laws and regulations in the entire world, because it doesn't help us in Kenya to have good ears, and in PNG or Fiji and Solomon Islands, their ears are gone. So we all need to hear each other. So we need to carry out sensitization on noise pollution. There must be accountability and transparency in combating noise pollution with the seriousness it deserves. And then there's strategic and sustainable rural and urban development, so that as you're going there, let us have environmental impact assessments so that we are not stressing other people. So that's what I wanted to say, because this is my last slide. I can see the moderator is here. But what we need is like perhaps maybe get noise barriers, traffic management. We can have electric cars. We can have loud land use planning and design, building design also, where you can have soundproof, changing driving styles, not hooting all the time. We can have building insulations and brake pads for trains, because in the UK, really, it is very, very bad. So at that point, I want to end my presentation at 14:19, and grateful for listening ears, because I think your ears are still okay, and I hope I've not damaged them to the decibels that are way beyond what should be done. So thank you very much for listening to me. $14.37.
I know, you're right on time, 15, same. Well, thank you, Honorable Lady Justice Jacqueline Karma. That was a great presentation on noise. I will take judicial notice of it as well, because I tend to loud a lot in the social setting. So it's a great judicial notice on me. Thank you very much. Okay, we got dinner at 6:30. Chief Justice? I don't know. General Assembly can decide whether you want to take question or whether you want to move the dinner to 7. Your decision. Tell me what you want to do. Okay. Okay, so what we'll decide now is we'll end the session, okay? So you all glad no question, are you? Huh? Maybe we have no time. No, we don't have time for it. We didn't at 6:30. You want to? Okay, I will just allow one question. Is anyone has a question? Just one only. Huh? Burning one, because that was the speaker, Ms. Melinda Jenke, who said, asked me to ask. Only one question. Okay, no question. All right, thank you very much. So let's give a big round of applause to our distinguished guest today. Okay, I'll hand over to the master of ceremony here for the housekeeping. Oh, we'll take a picture.
Thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long but insightful day. I'd like to thank everyone for being a lovely audience.
a lot of insight. As we've all heard, there's a wide spectrum of environmental law issues, not just your typical degradation of the environment, but we've heard about planning and environment, ESG and insurance, spins on how that's being affected by climate change. And there's a lot of insight into how we could all collaborate to make things better for our environment. So thank you everyone for being here. Again, thank you to all our panelists for participating. There's dinner at 6:30. We will start tomorrow's sessions at 9 a.m. in the same room. So thank you all again. Please enjoy the evening. And just before we close, again, we'll share some gifts with our friends and we're done for the day.
Oh, that's me. Oh, I get one as well. That's good. Thank you. Oh, beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. That officially ends our proceedings this evening. If I could just ask you to stay for a photo.
In case you want to use.
Oh, yeah.